Good morning. We're back for the penultimate episode of reading the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice, for about 10 minutes a day. And this is the 85th episode. I've been doing this essentially daily for nothing other than reading a phenomenal collection of writings at a very, very opportune time in world history. And it's been very elucidating to me, even though I knew a lot of this stuff beforehand. This has definitely served to fill in some gaps and tie some things together. So it's been fun, and if you're here watching this, you're probably not watching this in 2021, or at least not at this part of 21, because not many people have seen these episodes. I haven't really pushed it. That's fine. It's just been more of a personal diary journey. I'm trying to do this essentially every day, and the only day that I've missed so far is the 4th of July, because I was too busy doing 4th of July stuff, like building a raft and having a party and stuff. So anyway, long story short, this is going to be the last episode of this in terms of the reading, and we're finishing up the chapter with John Hasnas, and then we're going to read Michael Malice's very small chapter at the end of the book. So we'll just get reading. About a third of the way down on page 345, again, episode 85, the final chapter, and we're just going to read till it's finished. So here we go. In fact, this system is a terrible one for peacefully resolving disputes, and would be extremely unlikely to have many adherents in a free market. Its adversarial nature causes each party to view the other as an enemy to be defeated, and its winner-take-all character motivates each to fight as hard as he or she can to the bitter end. Since a loser gets nothing, he or she has every reason to attempt to reopen the dispute, which gives rise to frequent appeals. The incentives of the system make it in each party's interest to do whatever he or she can do to wear down the opponent while being uniformly opposed to cooperation, compromise, and reconciliation. That this is not the kind of dispute settlement procedure people are likely to employ if given a choice is evidenced by the large percentage of litigants who are turning to ADR in an effort to avoid it. My personal belief is that under free market conditions, most people would adopt compositional rather than confrontational dispute settlement procedures. Procedures designed to compose disputes and reconcile the parties rather than render third-party judgments. This was, in fact, the essential character of the ancient legal system that was replaced by the extension of royal jurisdiction. Before the rise of the European nation-states, what we might anachronistically called judicial procedure was chiefly a set of complex negotiations between the parties mediated by the members of the local community in an effort to reestablish a harmonious relationship. Essentially, public pressure was brought upon the parties to settle their dispute peacefully through negotiation and compromise. The incentives of this ancient system favored cooperation and conciliation rather than defeating one's opponent. Although I have no crystal ball, I suspect that a free market in law would resemble the ancient system a great deal more than the modern one. Recent experiments with negotiated dispute settlement have demonstrated that mediation, 1, produces a higher level of participant satisfaction with regard to both process and result, 2, resolves cases more quickly and at significantly lower costs, and 3, results in a higher rate of voluntary compliance with the final decree than was the case with traditional litigation. This is perhaps unsurprising, given that mediation's lack of a winner-take-all format encourages the parties to seek common ground rather than attempt to vanquish the opponent, and that since both parties must agree to any solution, there is a reduced likelihood that either will wish to reopen the dispute. Given human beings' manifest desire to retain control over their lives, I suspect that if given a choice, few would willingly place their fate in the hands of third-party decision-makers. Thus, I believe that a free market in law would produce a system that is essentially compositional in nature. Section 19 of this essay. In this article, I have suggested that when it comes to the idea of the rule of law, the American public is in a state of deep denial. Despite being surrounded by evidence, that the law is inherently political in nature, most people are nevertheless able to convince themselves that it is an embodiment of objective rules of justice which they have a moral obligation to obey. As in all cases of denial, people participate in this fiction because of the psychological comfort that can be gained by refusing to see the truth. As we saw with our friends Arnie and Ann, belief in the existence of an objective, non-ideological law enables average citizens to see those advocating legal positions inconsistent with their values as inappropriately manipulating the law for political purposes, while viewing their own position as neutrally capturing the plain meaning immanent within the law. The citizens' faith in the rule of law allows them to hide from themselves both that their position is as politically motivated as is their opponents, and that they are attempting to impose their values on their opponents as much as their opponents are attempting to impose their values on them. A lot of there and them. Don't know what we're talking about, but it's good enough. We get it. But again, as in all cases of denial, the comfort gained comes at a price. For with the acceptance of the myth of the rule of law comes a blindness to the fact that laws are merely the commands of those with political power, and an increased willingness to submit oneself to the yoke of the state. Once one is truly convinced that the law is an impersonal, objective code of justice, rather than an expression of the will of the powerful, one is likely to be willing not only to relinquish a large measure of one's own freedom, but to enthusiastically support the state in the suppression of others' freedoms as well. The fact is that there is no such thing as a government of law and not people. The law is an amalgam of contradictory rules and counter-rules expressed in inherently vague language that can yield a legitimate legal argument for any desired conclusion. For this reason, as long as the law remains a state monopoly, it will always reflect the political ideology of those invested with decision-making power. Like it or not, we are faced with only two choices. We can continue the ideological power struggle for control of the law, in which the group that gains dominance is empowered to impose its will on the rest of society, or we can end the monopoly. Our long-standing love affair with the myth of the rule of law has made us blind to the latter possibility. Like the Monocysians, who after centuries of state control cannot imagine a society in which people can buy whatever size shoes they wish, we cannot conceive of a society in which individuals may purchase the legal services they desire. The very idea of a free market in law makes us uncomfortable. But it is time for us to overcome this discomfort and consider adopting Socrates' approach. We must recognize that our love for the rule of law is unrequited, and that, as so often happens in such cases, we have become enslaved to the object of our desire. No clearer example of this exists than the legal process by which our Constitution was transformed from a document creating a government of limited powers and guaranteed rights into one which provides the justification for the activities of the all-encompassing superstate of today. However heart-wrenching it may be, we must break off this one-sided affair. The time has come for those committed to individual liberty to realize that the establishment of a truly free society requires the abandonment of the myth of the rule of law. And that concludes the essay. If you'd like, on page 348 and 349, there's 2 pages of footnotes. So it is a well-referenced essay. And here we go. The final chapter. Chapter 22. Here it is. Chapter 22. From the gentleman who wrote the book. Actually, the gentleman who composed the book and wrote the introductions to the chapter. But thankfully, used his leverage to get this done. And I think that, I know this sounds a little fanboyish, but I think that truly this is the right book at the right time and needs to be widely read and distributed, both to people who already kind of think along these lines, as there are not innumerable, but plenty of essays in here that literally go into some of the, not only the philosophy, but some of the techniques that could be used to build a freer society, anarchic-ish, if we want to call it that. So this is Michael Malice, chapter 22. This is from Why I Won't Vote This Year or Any Year from 2014. And this is his introduction, or an introduction of him at the start of the chapter that he composed. Michael Malice is the author of Dear Reader, the unauthorized autobiography of Kim Jong-il, and The New Right. He's also the organizer of the forthcoming The Anarchist Handbook, currently scheduled for release sometime last year. Malice is notorious for writing about himself in such a way as to confuse and annoy the reader for no discernible purpose whatsoever. Some good-ass trolling right there. And here we go. I rarely tell people that I don't believe in voting. Participation in the body politic is widely considered to be both a privilege and an imperative to the enlightened urban citizen. To choose otherwise is quite literally heresy, and heretics by and large have a difficult time of it in society. The platitudes I face as a non-voter are known to everyone, precisely because they are platitudes. People have marched for miles, or immigrants crossed oceans. The fables are beautiful and they are compelling, but that does not make them true. I do not agree that secretly flicking a switch once a year constitutes making your voice heard. Nor do I think that an annual trip to a voting booth is a criterion for whether or not. Nor do I think that an annual trip to a voting booth is a criterion for whether one can complain or not. My right to free speech is not contingent upon anyone else, no matter how many of them there are, whether they were elected to some office or however much they stamp their feet. Neither do I agree that the personal is the political. I fully reject the Kantian universalizability principle. Let me say that a little better. I fully reject the Kantian universalizability principle that underlies so much of contemporary moral discussion. What if everyone acted the way you did? Is not a useful means test for one's actions. I am a pure liberal. I choose to live in Brooklyn, and am very consciously grateful that my friends are as diverse as humanly possible. None of them think like me, none of them act like me, and none of them have the background that I do. This is a source of great pleasure, and I wouldn't change it for the world, nor could I. I'm not egotistical enough to think that, quote, everyone will act like I do, as if those around me were my mirror images. It is undeniably true that I don't have the practical ability to ignore the state. I have to use state roads, and if I refuse to pay taxes, the consequences will be dire for me. But there is literally nowhere on earth for me to go without some government claiming control over my person. Though democracies are increasingly common throughout the world, it is the state that is universal. These governments will continue to act regardless of any sort of popular approval, and certainly regardless of any approval of mine. State action proceeds independently of any democratic justification. The purest example of this could be seen at the 2012 Democratic Convention. Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa sought to amend the party platform to include a reference to God and to acknowledge Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He put the edit to the convention floor, seeking to approve the change via acclamation. Having failed to receive the outcome he sought, he asked for a revote. Then he tried again. Finally, he simply pretended that those in the audience, unanimously Democrats, big D and small d, had agreed with him. George W. Bush did the same thing when he sought United Nations authority to invade Iraq in 2003. Having seen that the votes were not there, he simply grounded his invasion in earlier resolutions. A party platform is a minor matter. War, solely government's purview, is far more serious. Yet in both cases, the vote was a formality, an ex post facto justification for an organization to do whatever the fuck it intended to do anyway. I'm sorry I added that, Michael. The fuck was mine. Because that's kind of where we're at these days. They're doing whatever the fuck they want to. I am not someone who thinks that he is, quote, making a difference by voting once a year. I was born in the Soviet Union, the empire that collapsed in 1991 after leaving Afghanistan in 1989 as the Warsaw Pact was falling apart. Sounds a little suspiciously similar to the circumstances of the United States at this time. In August of 2021, having just left Afghanistan in a chaotic leaving. We should have left, I think. The chaos, not so much. I was born in the Soviet Union, and my personal history led me to devote the last 2 years of my life educating the public about the horrors of North Korea. I constantly give talks about the situation in that least free nation where everyone votes. I'm actually doing the work rather than choosing a public servant to do it for me. Understanding the Soviet Union and North Korea gives a bit of insight into human social psychology. No matter how absurd the state line, a huge majority of the populace can be found to promulgate it. People will say with a straight face that having one choice for dear leader is tyranny, but having two is freedom. Is that second choice on the ballot really the qualitative difference? Most progressives understand that human nature is basically the same anywhere on the planet. Yet they think that those who rehash propaganda only exist in other bad countries. Barring that, they believe that those types are all to be found on the other side of the political spectrum. After all, the other side is where the evil, crazy people reside, those who want what's worst for everyone. The educated aren't immune from such traps. They are merely more articulate about them. Frankly, I am baffled that those of us who were nerds in high school now defer to the winners of popularity contests. There surely is a bit of the guard dog psychology about the whole thing, barking loudly to defend the system in order to get the master's respect and approval. If pressed, the simplest explanation I have for refusing to vote is this. I don't vote for the same exact reasons that I don't take communion. No matter how admirable he is or how much I agree with him, the Pope isn't the steward over my soul. Nor is any president the leader of my life. This does not make me ignorant or evil, any more than not being a Christian makes me ignorant or evil. If I need representation, I will hire the most qualified person to do so. Otherwise, I will smile and nod as my friends go to their places of worship, wishing them well while I simply pray to be left alone. And we're concluding the book on page 353. And again, this is my own copy. I leather bound it. It's the first time I ever created a leather hardbound out of a paperback, and there were many fits and starts and things that I screwed up, and things that I can do better next time. Specifically, not trashing the book by bending the spine over and then trying to reattach that to a flat piece of cardboard, which is essentially impossible. So I did a lot of sewing. So essentially the book is being held in primarily by sewing up and down the spine through the pages of the book. And then a small amount of glue that's underneath here where the cut down cover is literally glued right here. The cut down cover is glued right here, and then some cover paper over it. So anyway, it's not pretty, but it's a book that will probably stay on my shelf for the rest of my life, if you will. So I'm just trying to put a little work and a little more value into some of these things that really need some respect. And this book to me really needs respect. Probably going to bind up some of the other, key books in my collection at some point in time. Probably do Atlas Shrugged. Probably do what is my favorite book from Ayn Rand, which is We the Living. I know so many people are like, in terms of her novels, The Fountainhead and, Atlas Shrugged, and I've read both. They're both phenomenal. But to me, We the Living is the one that really, really crystallizes the need for human liberty and less central control, if we can just kind of go down that pathway. So anyway, I etched in the title of the book, Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice, and then on the side we've got Michael Malice's last name down at the bottom, and then we've got the Anarchist Handbook, the black flag comes in many colors, and then on the back, I etched in my property, and then I etched in kind of what this book is and what this copy of this book is to me, which is really a grimoire of the Enlightenment. I think that many of the things that were brought forward during the Enlightenment were things that I'm not going to say the only things that were important, but many of the ideas brought forth in the Enlightenment, I believe, were ideas based on individual natural rights, the right to property, the right to owning oneself, not having oneself be owned by a god or by a government, which, we know that essentially, implicitly or explicitly, the government claims to own us and everything that we produce. So did the kings, so has the church, so has the tribe, etc. So I believe that the Enlightenment really is one of those things that vaulted humanity forward in an imperfect way, and certainly it's been abused, and certainly the Enlightenment has brought forward things also that could be argued are destructive toward humanity. But I believe that it is one of the biggest steps forward in human society or societal evolution to this point in terms of the history that we're aware of. And I think that the writings, when anarchism and socialism were being built, if you will, out of some of the precepts of the Enlightenment, along through the 1800s, capturing that is very critical. And I think that there's so much that needs to be captured and maintained and read to push back against some of the viruses of the state. I mean, we're not talking about COVID here. I'm just more the mental viruses that are being injected into us from the second we're born till the second we die. I think that this grimoire of the Enlightenment is a way to help to build a natural immunity to the bullshit that's forced down our throat. And we'll leave it right there. This belligerent ass is checking off. Hope you've enjoyed this as much as I. Thank you.